Self-talk is a trendy topic nowadays on YouTube and elsewhere. And self-talk can be defined basically as the things we tell ourselves about ourselves repeatedly. Our self-talk is usually subconscious. We often are telling ourselves things about ourselves without even really realizing it. And thus, improving our self-talk is one of the easiest and fastest ways to change our lives for the better and to be happier people. I think I've come a long way in this regard in terms of improving my self-talk, and today I'd like to share some tips for how you can do the same. My name is Zachary Stockill, and since 2013, I've been working with men and women from all over the world, helping them overcome retroactive jealousy and save their relationships. If you'd like more information about my work, you can visit my website at retroactivejealousy.com. The first step in improving our self-talk is to acknowledge that the way we make sense of the world is telling ourselves stories. We tell ourselves stories about everything, and we may not even realize it. We may take certain things for granted, or we may take certain stories for granted, certain perspectives, certain thoughts about certain things. We may have certain interpretations of people, places, events, ourselves that are 100% ours. The way we get through life, good or bad, is by telling ourselves stories about ourselves and about the way the world works. And a crucial component in living a better life is to simply realize this, that we always have the option to tell ourselves a better story about anything, and that includes ourselves. We often tell ourselves stories that we inherit. For example, our parents may have had certain beliefs about sex and sexuality as children that we were exposed to, and without even realizing it, we're carrying those narratives around with us for the rest of our lives. Or maybe we find some YouTuber, not me, but maybe someone else, or maybe you find me or whatever. You're looking for insight on something and you find a narrative, find a certain point of view, and you don't even realize it. But that narrative or that point of view is influencing your thinking moving forward. It's influencing the story that you're telling yourself. All of this is to encourage you to start thinking about the stories that you're telling yourself. And if you're watching a video like this with regards to improving your self-talk, start thinking specifically about what your self-talk looks like. The things that you're telling yourself about yourself repeatedly, maybe even subconsciously. What are the stories that you are telling yourself about yourself? What are the stories you're telling yourself about your past? What are the stories you're telling yourself about your future? What are the stories, of course, that you're telling yourself about your present? Think broad with this question, get creative, and think outside the box. It isn't always an easy question to answer. I want to be clear about that. This is where working with a good therapist or coach can really come in handy. I'm not trying to plug my own services here, but I have a lot of experience helping people in this regard. So if you want more information about my work, you can click below. But if not, that's okay too. If you're stuck, another good place to start is to start thinking about the adjectives that you would use to describe yourself. Good or bad, what are some of the adjectives that you would use to describe yourself if you were someone outside of yourself? In other words, if you were an impartial third party looking at you, what words would you use to describe yourself? It may be positive things like ambitious or fit or smart or funny or whatever, but there may also be some negativity thrown in there too, like fat or dumb or unmotivated or lazy or whatever. You get my drift. And if you want to be serious about this exercise, be sure to be brutally honest with yourself. Also realize that some of this stuff may be not entirely inaccurate. For example, you're calling yourself overweight. Maybe you are overweight. I don't mean to suggest that all of your self-talk is 1000% inaccurate. Some of it may be accurate, a lot of it probably isn't. The point is you want to get as much of this stuff down on the page as you can. The next step is difficult. It's not easy, but over time it becomes easier. The next step is about catching that stuff as quickly as possible. So if you have a moment where you're starting to get down on yourself, or you're not giving yourself the credit that you're due, or you don't want to accept a compliment from someone, or you start feeling insecure or whatever, start catching those moments as quickly as possible. And by catching them, I simply mean noting them. Like, oh, I'm kind of getting down on myself here, or I'm not giving myself credit here, or why am I so resistant to that compliment? Start catching that stuff as quickly as you can. Start making little mental notes every time you have one of those moments where you feel like you're getting down on yourself a little bit. The next step is to start telling yourself a better story. And a good way to start doing that with some of your negative self-talk is to simply start reframing it. So for example, I'm going to use the weight example because it's one that's very close to my heart. I've struggled with my weight at various moments in my life. This is something, one of my own demons that I have to battle. If you're telling yourself, God, look at you, Zach, you're overweight and you're this and you're that, one of the ways I can reframe that is, yes, but I've lost weight in the past and I can lose weight again. Yes, this is a struggle of mine, but I've made a lot of progress over the years and it's not insurmountable and I can do this. Or, Zach, remember that time you lost 30 pounds in one summer? You can do that again. It's just about taking the necessary steps. By doing this, I'm reframing the story that I'm telling myself. Because if you go around telling yourself, I'm fat, I'm fat, I'm fat, I'm fat, you're almost describing it like it's some inescapable condition. Just, I can't do anything about it. I am who I am, and that's who I am, and it sucks, and there's nothing I can do. There's a real victim mentality embedded in that way of thinking. And that's something I'm not interested in at all. So if there's a way to reframe that, and if there's a way to reframe that with an emphasis on taking action, that's a way better use of my time and my mental energy than just going around with this label in my head of I'm fat. So you can think about this with anything. There's always a way to reframe the story that you're telling yourself in your head. But again, the most important component is identifying it in the first place. So don't neglect that first step. Now, the next component in this, after you've identified the story that you're telling yourself and you started to reframe it, is to make sure that your actions are congruent with the story you're telling yourself. For example, if I go around calling myself overweight in my head and just kind of getting down on my appearance or whatever, and then I start to reframe it by thinking, yes, but I've lost weight in the past and I'm taking steps and, this is not insurmountable. But then I spend the next 6 months eating Cheetos on the couch. My attempts to reframe my self-talk is not going to matter very much. They're not going to matter because my actions aren't congruent with the narrative that I'm trying to create in my head. And this is a component that I think is often lost in a lot of self-help literature and self-help thinking, where the emphasis is on affirmations and words and choosing a new narrative, but there isn't a lot of emphasis placed on actually taking action, actually making sure that your actions are congruent with the narrative you're crafting in your head, making sure that the actions you're taking is congruent with your self-talk. Because if your life is not congruent with this new self-talk that you're trying to ingrain in your head, eventually your brain is just not going to regard that self-talk at all. It's going to go back to the negative self-talk because it realizes that your actions are not lining up with this narrative that you're painting in your head. So be sure that your actions are at least starting to be congruent with the new self-talk that you're trying to incorporate in your daily life. It's going to speed things up in a big way. And finally, it's a good idea to just kind of get in this habit of always keeping an eye on your self-talk and going through this process and just making sure you're kind of keeping an eye on it consistently over time, rather than getting lazy, rather than letting yourself sink into depression and all the rest. Always remember as you go through life that you have 100% control over your self-talk. You can change it, you can shift it, you can change your actions to match your new ideal self-talk, and it truly is one of the most effective ways to start being a happier person overall. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching this today. If you got anything out of this video, please take a moment to let me know by clicking the like button below. I'd also ask you to please leave a comment telling me your thoughts. And while you're at it, please be sure you are subscribed to my channel to be notified of new videos moving forward. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.